Hello, friends. I hope you're having a spooky Halloween thus far. It's the time of the season to get scared, to gather around with your friends, play some pranks, and get a little spooked. This is definitely, we're recording this on Halloween, not like a Tuesday night.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, that would be insane.
It would be misleading.
It would be misinformation. But in sort of keeping with the reason for the season, we thought it would be fun to take a break from the usual horrors that we're discussing and talk a little bit about what is certainly one of my favorite horror film franchises, which is the Romero Living Dead series, or the Romero Dead series. I don't even know what the proper term is, because there's so many weird issues with like the rights and the various branching films and stuff. I used to be conveniently just called the Dead Trilogy, and boy, having just rewatched all 6 films, it really should have stayed the Dead Trilogy.
Yeah, that's a shame.
But yeah, so me and Cari, we've watched those 6 films over the last couple of days and taken some notes. I'd seen all of them, several of them many, many times, except for the most recent one, which is Survival of the Dead. And, now I've seen it, but we'll talk about them more specifically in a bit. But before we get into discussing the Romero films themselves, I think one of the reasons why I thought about doing this as opposed to any other just like horror franchise, if you follow us on Twitter and we probably bring it up on the show a lot. Like me and Cari, we both really love horror films. We've binged a bunch of the franchises over the last couple of years.
A lot of them.
Yes. With varying degrees of like quality. And I am definitely not above just watching like crappy schlock. I really do love.
I love garbage.
That reminds me. We have this little shot here.
Oh, yeah. Now? Yeah, okay.
All right. I gotta crack something to take it down with. All right. Well, down the hatch, friends.
Cheers. Happy Halloween. Ugh.
Oh, that's horrid. Truly horrid.
Ugh.
Well, again, with that in mind, the reason why I thought it would be interesting to talk about the Romero films, as opposed to a different horror franchise, is that I think regardless of the quality of the films themselves, and I do think some of them are very good, but even though it varies, and whether or not you might enjoy horror as a franchise or, get kind of like grossed out or something in the Romero films, I think that more so than a lot of other horror movies, particularly of that time, the Romero films at least all have really interesting ideas in them. Mm-hmm. There's stuff about like, not like super well defined or developed all the time, but there is some interesting like kind of class stuff, race stuff, broadly like social issues and thinking through that and using the horror genre and more specifically like the zombie motif as a way to explore those ideas. Mm-hmm. And so it seems like it would be fun and worthwhile to think about it and talk through it on this program. I think the way to start here is maybe thinking about zombies in general, because like the very first film that we'll talk about in more detail in a second, the Night of the Living Dead from 1968, which I'm assuming a lot of people have seen.
Also, spoiler alert for the whole franchise. If you haven't
yeah,
seen.
absolutely, yeah. If you haven't watched any of these movies, watch them. I don't really think like plot wise you're super missing out on anything if you get like spoiled.
There's gonna be people that get ate.
Yes, okay. Zombies are going to tear apart and eat people in horrific ways. But the Night of the Living Dead film from 1968 is generally credited as, and Romero himself is also kind of credited as coming up with the modern zombie motif. Like that figure, that idea. Of course, zombies existed before then. They were typically like more localized to like the Caribbean, and there was like the zombie idea was very in touch with like voodoo, and most zombie stories, certainly like horror stories I remember that I've read from like comics from like the 1930s or 40s or 50s are all about like a single person getting zombified.
Yeah. And it's like some kind of witch doctor caricature controlling them usually, right?
Right. It's usually like you're a thrall. Like if you're reanimated, you're like a sort of a slave. And I think I was reading a little bit about it, and there's some speculation that part of that mythos is tied to like the practice of slavery, right? And sort of as a cultural response to it, right?
That's interesting.
Which is pretty interesting. I did the first zombie movie. You looked it up, Cari. What was it called again?
That's White Zombie.
White Zombie.
That one's actually set in Haiti. So it is like directly tied to that. It is like an evil voodoo master turning somebody into a zombie and controlling them.
I think Bela Lugosi is in that.
Yes. A white Haitian voodoo master who commands a crew of zombies. That's who he plays. Oh, that's fun.
Oh, that's fun. So we did not watch that movie, so we're not going to talk about it. But
we should.
We probably should. Yeah, that'll be for a later thing. But in any case, that's kind of where the mythos starts, and then Romero is the one who's credited of turning it into like the sort of zombie apocalypse thing. There's more of a sci-fi inflection there, and then. Even if you haven't seen these films, you've definitely heard of zombies, right?
Sure.
And certainly for the last, 20 years, there was, especially in the early 2000s, there was just, big resurgence of zombie films.
Yeah. And then, of course, The Walking Dead, just like...
Right. The Walking Dead, which was first a comic, and now is, has been this flagship TV show for fucking, whatever, 10 years plus. Way too long. There was 28 Days Later in 2002.
Great movie.
Which is a fantastic little horror movie as well. There was World War Z. There was the Max Brooks wrote this book around 2003, which was the Zombie Survival Guide. And then I'm pretty sure he wrote World War Z, which was a novel, which then also got turned into a film. But that was
that's one with the fast zombies, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that was also around the time where there was the remake in 2004 of Dawn of the Dead,
which I love.
I think it's Zack Snyder's first movie, and I think it's his best one. It's his only good movie. That was the era, because that was when I was a teenager, and I think Dawn of the Dead, his remake, which was 2004, I believe,
it
was the first time I saw a zombie movie, and I saw it in theaters, and I was blown away, and I was like, this is such a fucking cool concept, right? And then it had this big cultural moment, and again with the Zombie Survival Guide and all this, Zombieland, all these other things, it became this highly commercial thing, and almost this weird culture industry pseudo individuality where it was in 2006, right? You could be wherever you were. There was some conversation you could have about what would you do if there was the zombie apocalypse was happening. It was what would I use as a weapon?
Epic zombies versus ninjas type tips and things of that nature.
Right. I mean, that was also
Plants vs. Zombies, remember that?
Sure. I was going to say with the epic ninja thing, you made me think of mall ninja shit, right? There was and you could still even buy it now, in that Bud K magazine that I got, right? They have katanas that are you could slice a zombie's head off.
Right.
And I think the weird thing, right, with all of the various iterations that it went through is that most of the time zombies today are very deeply coded as the other, and particularly a racial other. And most zombie premises now that I've seen, I'm sure there are good ones going on now, so if I forgot them, get mad at me or whatever, but most of them now tend to have like a sort of reactionary politics associated with them, right? It's like the castle doctrine shit. It's like I can like board up my house. I can, I could have all these cool fucking vigilante weapons.
Right.
And if these masses of people try to swarm my house and take my things, right? Like any other kind of apocalyptic vision.
I actually just saw the other day when I was looking for a patch online, a patch that said something like, don't come asking for my help when the zombies come or whatever. And like something about guns. Like it was all like with a bunch of other weird like right-wing type patches.
Sure. I mean, I remember there was a period when like if you could be in like a big box store or like a Home Depot or something, and they would have like signs that you could put up in your yard that would have like zombie shooting or zombies will be shot on sight and that all that kind of shit.
Right. Zombie preparedness kits and stuff. Yes, I remember that. Not
to say that everybody who's into zombies is like reactionary or whatever, but
I love zombies.
I clearly, I do as well. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk about that. And I'm a very good boy. But I do think like in terms of media, talking about the way media portrays them, right? It's it's become a shorthand of like the great mass of other people usually trying to get in. Yes. Yeah. Invading. I mean, there's one shot in like World War Z, I remember, where it's like at the West Bank or at like Jerusalem or something, and there's just like hordes of zombies like dying in this giant pile to get over a wall to like get into Israel, and it's like very like, oh, come on.
I don't even remember that. My God.
Like what is trying to be said here? So all of this is to say that why I think it's interesting that it made this turn is that I think that they have certainly at least somewhat more of like a lefty progressive politics to them. Yeah. Even if it's not super stated or like the most important thing about the movie. I think that they're using that premise to do something a little bit more interesting. And certainly like an anti-authority one.
Oh yeah.
What was the first zombie movie you ever saw?
I was trying to think about it when you were saying the first one that you saw, and I don't think it was that Dawn of the Dead remake, just because I would have already been like 18 at that time. So I was trying to think, and I actually think it was like my high school boyfriend had torrented or downloaded on Kazaa Night of the Living Dead, and that was the first one that I saw.
Very cool. Well, let's start. Let's go through the Romero Dead films.
Let's do it.
Night of the Living Dead, 1968.
Number one, baby.
You want to try to describe the plot?
Oh, no, I think you should describe it.
Okay, all right. In a nutshell, a group of characters hold up in a farmhouse while this mysterious occurrence is happening, and it slowly dawns on them, both through their lived experiences, but then very importantly over the radio and television, that the recently dead have been reanimated. It's unclear exactly why. There is a suggestion in a newscast that like there's some kind of space radiation that has blanketed the Earth.
Yeah.
And a group, all of the recently dead are coming back to life, and they're attacking this group of people in a farmhouse. The two main characters are Ben and Barbara, but it's sort of a larger group of strangers are all in this house, and and then they survive, and everything goes okay.
It works out totally fine, and they don't say wholesale mass murder over and over at all on the radio, because everything is so chill. Yeah.
I mean, so in watching it again, I'm sure there are people who are like horror diehard fans, and I want to say, like, obviously I'm talking about this film. I love it. I love the entire saga.
I love it. Yeah.
It is kind of boring to me. The first movie.
I was surprised by, like, I found it a little bit slow or whatever, because I remembered liking it so much, and I was excited to watch it with you, because I know that it's, like, a movie that I love, but I was surprised, like, it was just, like, slower than I remembered it, and maybe that's, again, in part because it was the first zombie movie I really saw, that it was just so exciting seeing that as a first-time thing. Maybe that's what it was.
Yeah, there's a couple of things at play here. I do think, like, part of it is just... it was Romero's first film too.
Yeah. And again, it is very good though.
I mean, for a first film, it's excellent, but there's still those kind of rough edges to it. especially in some of the stuff with like the sound design is a little weird. I think like, you know, visually it's interesting, but it also is very reminiscent, and I think this is probably in part deliberate, and it's probably in part because it was like extremely low budget, but it like feels like a 50s B movie.
Yeah.
It feels like a really good one,
yeah.
but it still, it feels in that genre, which is weird because it came out in 1968. But you know, there's a kind of like stodginess to the acting. I think the main guy who plays Ben is really good, and you were looking him up, Cari. He was like a professor.
Yeah, I believe it said he was a professor on his Wikipedia page. And he was a director too.
Oh, cool.
Huh.
But yeah, I mean, the kind of the stuff to me that is, you know, it's not only that. I mean, there's like a very baseline element of, you know, it's a little older and it's a little low budget, so like the effects aren't as great or as spectacular. You know, they're kind of like set up again in a somewhat more hokey way. The rules seem a little inconsistent from like zombie kill to zombie kill. There's like the one at the very end with the little girl who like stabs her mom.
Yeah.
But you know, the great stuff is at the very end of the film, which is like if you've seen it before, and I've seen it probably, you know, half a dozen times. You know, you really know it's like the last 20 minutes are when it really gets interesting for me, which is like, first of all, you have all the iconic shots of like the group of zombies outside the house,
right,
you know, feasting and stuff, or approaching the house. And then the very end of the film, which is like the iconic, memorable thing. Which, if you haven't seen the film, part of the subtext going on here and why this is more than just like a little horror movie is that, you know, everybody in the cast is white except for the main character, Ben, who's black. And so when Ben first comes to this like abandoned farmhouse, you know, the only person he first sees in there is Barbara, who's this like frightened young white woman.
Hysterical.
And she's like literally hysterical. And we kind of talked about that as well, because I know like Romero later, he made some comments about how he regretted that like the main female lead was sort of like this damsel in distress.
But interestingly, I was reading earlier, and I think I might have mentioned to you, is that she was written as more of like a strong character to begin with, and then they rewrote it in response to the actress's performance. So really it's women's fault that it's like a hysterical female character.
Sure. That's what else can I say to that? Somebody will just clip it out of context. But anyway, but yeah, so he's there, and then like among the other people in the house there's like a middle-aged couple and their daughter, and this guy is like, you know, it's like the pinnacle of the like, I don't know, like white flight, suburban panic kind of guy, right? Like
reactionary.
He's only out for himself and his family. They're like hiding in the cellar. At first he really doesn't want to help. He keeps fighting with Ben. Ben has a gun. And he, you know, at a certain point in the movie, he's like telling his wife, he's like, I got to get that gun away from him. And it's never explicitly stated, but I think it's very clear that there's like the racial dynamic going on there, right?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
of course.
This film is written, you know, produced in the 60s in the tumult of that time, and there's definitely this sense that like part of the reason why Ben appears threatening to the other characters is because he's black. And again, the way that is rendered, I think in Romero's, you know, like point of the movie at the very end is one of the things that we see as they're like watching TV broadcasts, is that there are like these bands of police and like, I guess like vigilantes that are like wandering the countryside with guns, you know, trying to like hunt down zombies. And I mean, you said it while we were watching it. They look like a posse. You know, that's what it looks like. It looks like you know, and so at the very end of the movie, Ben survives the whole night, and he's the only survivor in the house of like him and it's like 5 or 6 other characters. Everybody else dies because the zombies come in.
Right.
But he survives, and at the very end of the movie, we see that these like vigilante posse cop guys are like sweeping through, and they see Ben in the house, and they're like, "Oh, there's one, shoot him."
Right.
Spoiler alert. And so Ben gets shot. And that's the very end of the film, right? Which is like a very bleak ending, but I think
absolutely.
Again, I think there's a very clear political inflection there about what's being said.
Sure, and there was, to that same point, there was a line that I wrote down. The thing that really stood out to me on this rewatch of it, I guess because I hadn't watched it in a really long time either, was like all the radio broadcasts that they were listening to, and there was one line that the announcer said they might look like people, but they act like animals. And it was just kind of like trying to like create that separation of like fully dehumanizing the zombies or whatever. And I think that adds to that same message that you were talking about that's so clear at the end. Like that's what the posse is operating on. We're rounding up animals. We're killing animals.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I think, you know, this is also the beginning of the core thing that remains the interesting thing about zombies, right? Which is like, they're monsters, but they also are us. You know, they're like this kind of mirrored version of us, right? It could be your loved ones, right? Like I mentioned, you know, you have the plot point here in the very first of these movies where like the family member comes back and kills the other family members who are like too shocked to stop them, and that sort of thing. And there is definitely, you know, throughout all of his movies, this idea that like, you know, there is something to be said about people working together, not working together, common humanity, not common humanity, to varying degrees of interest.
Right. I mean, even the thing of like having to kill your own family members or whatever is a theme over and over. And I think it's in the very last movie where it just becomes like very, very heavy-handed.
Oh yeah. Well, let's not skip ahead
yet. Get into that now. But.
So let's move on. Unless is there anything else you want to say about Night of the Living Dead?
No, most of my notes were just me writing wholesale murder every time the radio announcer guy said it. And it's a lot of times. And then there was no documentary for this one, right? No, we didn't watch one.
I'm sure there is one, but we didn't watch the making of.
One fun fact about Night of the Living Dead that I didn't know was that it is one of the most successful independent movies ever made. How many times do you think it made back its budget?
Oh, easily 200 or something.
263.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, it's iconic. Like, it's one of those, I think it may have been admitted already into the Congressional Library of, like, important culturally, you know, significant films or whatever. The other reason why, too, nowadays everybody's seen it, is it's in the public domain, right? Like, you can just download it for free.
I didn't know that.
Without any rights issues. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of people have sampled it in like music and stuff for reasons like that, especially the opening scene, you know, they're coming to get you, Barbara, right?
It's funny also, I just remembered, like, zombies are such like an ubiquitous part of the culture now that like everybody just sees them, including kids or whatever. And we were commenting while we were watching the movies that stuff now is so much more violent, including like The Walking Dead. Like The Walking Dead is just on TV and it's explicitly violent.
Oh, sure.
I think it was even mentioned in the documentaries that we watched. They mentioned that they had problems with that. And one of the things was that the MPAA film rating system wasn't out yet when Night of the Living Dead came out. So they let kids in to see it. And it caused like a huge uproar because like, how can you show this stuff to kids? It's like traumatic or whatever. And now it's like a kid could turn on the TV and watch that at any time.
Right. Or they'll dress up like a zombie for Halloween or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, that is an interesting thing, especially when you look at like, I would argue any of those early movies, but particularly Night of the Living Dead is so tame compared to anything you would see now. I mean, even, again, just amateur stuff made on, like, YouTube or whatever.
For sure.
Tends to be a lot more graphic and gory. The other thing, too, I should mention about Night of the Living Dead, which starts off here, is because Romero, like, was a guy, and he's sometimes also called, like, a working-class filmmaker. I think there's, like, some question about what that means. He was a low-budget filmmaker, for sure. And he made most of his films in... and certainly the original of these, the Dead trilogy, in and around Pittsburgh. So, you know, he's very like indie filmmaker guy, you know, very skeleton crew, no pun intended, haha. But he had worked in a lot of like commercials and TV and stuff. And so a theme that's, you know, again, very present in a lot of these films to varying degrees of effectiveness and interest is the role of the media. And so, you know, Night of the Living Dead has a lot of like the radio or like we mentioned, like the TV. And it's very heavily present. And especially so when we move into the next one, which was Dawn of the Dead from 1978.
Oh, yeah. This starts in a news station, right?
That's right. The opening of this film is like just pure fucking chaos.
Chaos, yeah.
But in a nutshell, the original Dawn of the Dead. Do you want to take a stab at the plot, or should I just do all of them?
The original Dawn of the Dead. You said that with such an attitude.
I thought we were going to go back and forth doing them, and you punted it right back to me.
So, the original Dawn of the Dead was released in 1978. And it starts off in a news station, but then pretty quickly gets to a mall, which is, you mentioned the name of the mall, Shane. You said
the Monroeville Mall.
The Monroeville Mall. Famous mall, also referenced by Stephen King. Fun fact for the listener. See, this is why you can't let me do the summaries. So they are in the mall for like most of the movie from there, and it is like a long allegory for consumerism to me. Like, you know, there's that scene where it's just like a montage of all the stuff that they're doing in the mall, and they're like shopping and kind of trying to find that joy, but they can never like get to it again. Obviously, in their case, because they're surrounded by zombies and they're gonna die. So
yeah, it's four characters.
Yeah.
Two are cops. And I had to look up their names because, like a lot of Romero's movies, these early ones, like the names are so inconsequential. Unless somebody is given a nickname, everybody's name is like John or Joe or Peter.
Franny, so I think, is the female character.
Yeah, so there's two cops, Roger and Peter. They're SWAT cops, and that's another really interesting thing at the front of this movie. And then there's Steven, who's called Flyboy, and then there's Francine, or Franny. And so Steven and Franny work at the TV station, and they're like a couple. And so Flyboy has like a helicopter, they get out of there, they team up with these two SWAT guys, and so we see like the TV station at the front of the movie, but then the next thing we see is like a SWAT raid on a project.
Right.
And I think it's implied to be Philadelphia. I'm pretty sure it's in Philly.
I think it's explicitly Philadelphia. Yeah.
And so there's... Oh yeah, you want to talk about this brutal cop raid?
I mean, they're just like explicitly saying like really racist like slurs and stuff as they go about their business here.
Yeah, they're like raiding this project because there's like a gang that runs the project and they don't want to like give up their corpses or whatever. And so again, all this is happening in like a very brief flurry. And yeah, these cops are like super racist and awful. The
like regular cops, they're just like real cops.
Yes, the people in the projects are calling them pigs as they're like having this massive like gun battle, and they like sweep through the different apartments and they're just like blowing people away. And then of course there are like zombies show up, and there's one in particular, there's like a really like nasty racist cop, and that's where Peter is played by Ken Foray, who again, another black protagonist, kills the super racist cop, and then he meets up with Roger, and they're like in the basement, and they're like, let's get the fuck out of here, like fuck this. And that's a big theme in this movie, and then in all the subsequent ones, which is people just being like, fuck this, let's just go AWOL, like why even bother trying to like do any of this again. And I think it's also interesting too, like even though two of the main characters are cops, like this opening scene is like explicitly anti-cop, right?
Yeah. The note that I have after this scene is about the shot of all the reactionary gun people. Do you remember that? And after that was when you said like this is, again, I think you just said it too, it's much more chaotic versus the last movie, and it also feels almost hyper real. Is that what you called it?
Sure.
And I definitely got that sense as well.
Yeah, there's the tone of the original Dawn of the Dead, which if you haven't seen it is like I remember the first time I saw it, which was only probably like 5 or 6 years ago, because it's very hard to get a hold of because of again weird rights issues. I think there's a few places they have it on YouTube. Obviously, you can find other means of downloading it or what have you. But like you can't like you can't just like easily get like a DVD or like a video on demand rental of it, which is surprising because again, it was so iconic, and there was the remake of it and so many ripoffs of it. But, like, it's so fucking weird. It's a really, really weird movie. And it's low budget, but in a way that feels different from Night of the Living Dead, where, like, it really feels almost, like, improvisational as you're going through. So the scene that you're describing, so after they leave the city and they're, like, flying in the helicopter, they just, like, look down at the ground and they see just, like, wandering bands of, like, reactionary rednecks. And then it just cuts to them. And we have, like, a 3 or 4 minute little sequence of these guys who, again, very similar to the end of Night of the Living Dead. They're just like country bumpkins with guns, just so fucking happy that they get to like kill people. Which is funny because then that's like, in a way, that's what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, right? Like, that's what zombie movies have actually become. Like, the fantasy is the thing that, like, he's explicitly, like, saying, like, look at these horrible people.
Right.
In the
thing
movie.
that he's critiquing is just, like, the theme of every zombie thing now. Like, how badass it is to be able to hunt down zombies, elaborate ways to, like, blow up hordes of zombies all at once, all the shit that they do in The Walking Dead with that.
I get a license to kill whoever I want now.
That makes me think, like, there's, and we won't get into it here, but there's something interesting about, like, that whole season about The Walking Dead where they're, like, in a prison to protect themselves from the zombies.
Sure, yeah,
like, that's very interesting.
And they fight the prisoners, too.
They do.
Yeah, a little weird. But in any case, so then it's after all that, they get to the mall, and that's where most of the movie takes place. And they, like, fortify the mall. They get it set up. They spend some time clearing it out, and then the great sequence that you were talking about is the one where it's like the consumer fantasy wish fulfillment sequence, where it's like a montage of now that they're in the mall and they're safe, they're all like shopping.
They're living it up.
They're living it up. They get to, take whatever products they want. There's a great scene where I think it's Peter and like Flyboy, and they're at the bank.
Yeah.
And they like open up the register, and Peter's like, you never know. and then they just take all the, like tens of thousands of dollars or whatever and put it into a duffel bag, which is like completely useless.
What are they going to do with it? Yeah. And there's that perspective. And then also at the same time, I forget which character says it to another character, but they're like looking at all the zombies that are surrounding the mall and trying to get into the mall or already in there. And one of them says to the other, this was an important place in their lives. Like, the importance of that consumerism to these people is what's driving them here. And I think maybe also that's like a hint of the Romero thing of having the zombies remember stuff from their living lives. Sure. That's the latter part is definitely a big point of it. And it should be mentioned here that after they made Night of the Living Dead, the Romero had co-written it with another guy, Joe Russo. And then they had some like fight afterwards about like what to do with the concept, and so they split off into 2 different directions. And so Romero's films and canon were then called like Of the Dead, and Russo wrote the novel Return of the Living Dead, which then got turned into a separate film franchise where the rules and everything are very, very different. And we'll get into that maybe when we talk about Day of the Dead. I actually didn't know that was where that came from.
Yeah, so that's why even talking about like the Night of the Living Dead franchise can be confusing.
Yeah, people confuse it with the,
There's literally 2 that are branched off the same thing. Aren't IP rights fun?
We love it.
But in any case, but the thing in Dawn, right, is like you were talking about, Cari, with the zombies, coming to the mall. I mean, it's very explicit here that like the because in the first movie they're just sort of monstrous, like they're not doing anything except trying to kill the protagonists.
Right.
In this movie, like the zombies and the whole idea of like the undead or the living dead is very clearly like this sort of maybe slightly ham-fisted indictment of consumer culture of like the late 70s, right? It's like the only thing that we have is to like shop, and we're in this like big, for the time, like modern glitzy shopping mall, and that's why all the zombies want to get back in, is so that they can experience shopping. And then even our protagonist, right, is like, the sort of height of when they feel super safe and secure is to go shopping, and then like immediately after that like sequence, there's like a scene where they're like all playing cards and they're using like the whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars that they just stole out of the bank, and you just like look at their faces and they're like, this fucking sucks.
Yeah, like they're so depressed.
It's very clearly because it's like, you know, basically consumption is just like living to live, right? Like there's no purpose to it. And I think that's very, very clearly not even like the subtext. That's like the text of the film.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty explicit. There's like scenes where they're like eating caviar or, gosh, I forgot the main character's love interest name, but the guy is saying to Franny, we really got it made here. Flyboy is saying, great name. Flyboy is saying to Franny, you know, we really got it made here. This is so great. And she's like really the only one who explicitly later says, like, you don't see that this is a prison too. Right.
Yeah, it's like the idea of the safety of consumerism is actually just this thin veneer, and across, you know, a few inches of sheetrock and plywood, right, is like the terror of the world. And there's also like in this movie the beginning of a theme that then again runs throughout Romero's films and was picked up and done in a lot of other movies, which is like the people going insane from the trauma of dealing with the situation. And in this case, it's the character Roger who just like flips out. And then through, you know, because he's responding with like a stress reaction to like a really, you know, horrible reality. He ends up getting bitten. Again, spoiler alert. And he dies. And I think that's also the first implication in any of zombie movie that like a bite can lead to you becoming a zombie.
Oh yeah.
But then at the very end of the movie, you know, just when they think everything is like kind of okay, or they're trying to plan their next move, a group of like marauders show up.
Nomadic bikers.
yeah. Which is interesting on a couple of different levels. I think first of all, it's like, you know, on a thematic thing, it's like the breakdown of all authority. Because throughout the movie, too, they keep talking about, like, oh, if we make it for the border, what if we have to encounter, like, you know, the National Guard or whatever? And it's like, no, at this point in the zombie apocalypse, like, all of social order has just broken down. And so there's this like group of like a couple dozen like bikers who show up and break into the mall to like steal their shit and kill them. And this is really when the movie just becomes like a weird riff on itself, you know? Like
it's a weird movie, but it's so good.
Yeah. Like I mean, because too, if it's not clear, I mean, it's a serious premise, but it is, and I wouldn't call it an outright comedy, but it is very goofy. And
there's a lot of funny moments
in the third act. I mean, the bikers are like putting pies in the zombies' faces.
Yeah, which is really fun, but
and of course, one of the bikers is played by Tom Savini, who did the makeup effects.
He's great.
And he's a hoot. But yeah, it's a really fun and weird ending. And they finally get away. Or I should say, Franny and Peter get away in the helicopter, and it's sort of an ambiguous ending.
Yeah. I think there's a moment where Peter's contemplating, like, or Flyboy. Is it Flyboy or Peter?
No, I think Peter considers killing himself. Yeah.
Peter considers killing himself, which was like a sad moment, but then he gets out of that.
Sure. And originally, I mean, we talked about this a little bit, and then we watched a documentary that was called Document of the Dead, that was made like contemporaneous to the filming of it, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you can find it on YouTube, and it was like...
Everybody in it is smoking a lot.
Yes, and you can see George Romero there. Everybody looks so cool. It's like the late 70s.
They're so fucking cool. Oh my god. The guy with like the plaid hat.
Oh yeah. I think he was like either the cinematographer or like the head grip or something.
Obsessed with him.
Yeah, he like and the other kind of fun thing, and again to speak to the guerrilla low budget styling of the film, they were shooting it in an actual mall, and they were like shooting it from... It was something like, like from when the
11 to 7. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m.
From when the mall closed to when it opened. So they were shooting, all these late nights. And there are moments when they're like driving like fucking cars and shit.
They made a mess in there for sure.
And you're like, oh my God, they had to clean up so much after this.
Yeah.
But the look of the zombies too is a little bit more developed. It's not great, especially on a bunch of the extras. It's basically just like blue face paint.
Yeah,
but
you get the idea when you see them.
It's a really fun and weird movie, and I think especially if you've only ever seen like the Dawn of the Dead remake or like all the various iterations of it, it's very surprising.
Yeah,
when you first see it, I would say. I mean, this was your first time seeing it, right?
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be like so weird. And when I say weird, I don't mean that in a bad way. Like, there's just a lot of like weird like music and like scenarios, like you were saying, with the bikers like putting pies in the zombies' faces. And during that time is when that kind of like circusy music is playing, right?
Yes, yeah, the gonk song.
It's so fun.
Because that's at the very end too. Then even after the bikers leave, the last couple shots, like over the credits, are just now all the zombies are in the mall.
Right at the end, they take them all back,
and they're just like walking around. There's like one shot where there's like a zombie, and the zombie's like looking at like a mannequin. That's like all dressed up. It's very like, again, it's very clearly about this sort of like mindless consumer culture stuff in a sort of playful tone.
The ending really calls back that line of like they're coming back to a place they're like comfortable and familiar with or whatever, because they're all like going through as if they were like shopping, but they're just like ambling about in that like zombie like way. But it's a really good ending. I really liked it.
What's your favorite zombie kill?
Like out of anything ever, or out of this movie?
No, at this movie. Are you crazy? I was going to do it for each movie.
Okay. I don't know. I have a very bad memory, so it all kind of like blends together for me. What was your favorite one?
I just like there's a moment at the very end where a biker, like, there's like a what is it, like a blood pressure test?
That was really good. Really good.
And he keeps wanting to do it. He sticks his arm in at first, and one of the other raiders is like, "Come on, let's go." And then like later, like in the middle of the battle, he like goes and he puts his arm back in. Then the zombies get him and they rip his body away. So then the arm, the severed arm that's like oozing blood, has the blood pressure machine, and then it just goes like 0 over 0.
That was a really good one.
A lot of weird, inventive stuff. And I think, again, with this one, it's like the first of the movies to really start doing that. Like, what are some fun ways we can kill zombies? What are some weird makeup effects we can do? And that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Again, Dawn of the Dead is probably one of the most known. It was also the big hit, like Night of the Living Dead was. It had like a pretty big international release. That was then when there were like a million sort of copies that started to be made, especially internationally. And the next one in the franchise, right? Like because then there was like a lot of talk, like, oh, got to come up with a sequel to it. Is very, very different, and was received very differently at the time. And this one was Day of the Dead, 1985. So again, almost another 10 years. Like each one of these movies, like every 10 years.
Right.
Day of the Dead, 1985. Apparently was not well liked when it came out.
So surprising.
Because I think not only is this the best movie of this bunch, but for me, this is like top 10 movies of all time.
It's
easily.
So good. It was so surprising to me when you told me that it flopped. I really couldn't believe it.
I guess I'll do the summary for this one. Because again, this is like, I've probably seen this movie like 20 times. Like, this is one of those movies where I can put it on and watch it, and the second it's over, I'm like, another one of those. Let's go. I'll watch it again immediately. Because there's so many great details and things in it. But Day of the Dead takes place, and each of these, sort of suggested by the title, take place a little further on into this calamity. So, Night of the Living Dead is literally the night that it happens. Dawn of the Dead is like the first few weeks after. Day of the Dead is like months have gone by. And the premise is there's a group of scientists and a group of military soldiers who are all like cohabitating in this bunker. And when this whole thing started, they were like tasked with figuring out what they could do about the zombie apocalypse from the government. And now months have gone by and they're all just going insane.
Yeah.
And that's the whole movie. Like, and most of it is takes place again underground, and they shot in an old mine in Pennsylvania, but it takes place in Florida. So like the very beginning of the movie, they're like flying around looking for like survivors or whatever. They don't find any, and they come back.
I love that opening sequence, by the way, with like the money blowing away and the crocodile coming out of the bank. I mean the alligator, not croc. I'm from Florida. I can't believe I just said crocodile.
Crocodile camp.
Kill me.
He comes out. Yeah, he comes out of the bank. There's also the fame with the title shot is one of the most famous zombies as well, is Dr. Tongue. And it's this fucking Savini masterpiece bit of makeup with this like zombie with this tongue hanging out. It's so wet and gross, and the effects too in this I think are just like incredible.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, you can really see the evolution through the films as it goes on.
Sure, just like more developed, weirder, taking more risks, doing bigger things, just more refined in a bunch of ways. And yeah, most of the film takes place underground, and again, it's divided roughly into two camps, these sort of two factions. You have like scientists and military. And the reason why I love this movie is that Romero has talked a lot about him being influenced by like comics, specifically like EC comics, genre comics from like the 40s and 50s, like Tales from the Crypt, and weird fantasy and stuff. And in those comics, which were all like, like single short stories that always had a twist, almost like Twilight Zone episodes, right? Like they always had like a little ironic twist at the end. And in most of those stories that were written during like the early Cold War period, there often was this framing of like science versus the military, and science was trying to do good things for mankind, and then the military is trying to weaponize it. And so that's always been this sort of sci-fi trope. And so when you hear, it's a group of scientists and a group of military people underground, you assume that it's going to map onto that.
Right.
And even when the movie kind of starts, you think so, because the main character, Sarah, she's a researcher, and she has like good intentions and everything. But as the film progresses, you see like they're both 100% insane, like to an irredeemable point, I would argue.
You get like a hint of this, and I don't think we mentioned it in Dawn of the Dead 2. Remember, I believe he's a scientist on TV, the guy with the eye patch, and he's yelling, everybody else is so stupid, you're not even
dummies,
worth saving.
The stupids, the idiots. Yeah.
And he's like, if you just would have like listened to me, then everything would have been fine.
Yeah. It's a sort of a disdain in general for authority, and a disdain for like institutions. And again, I think what's really interesting is taking that kind of trope and turning it on its head, where it says like, no, the scientists are not the good guys here. Right. Like they're not like, even if they're well intentioned. And there's open question to whether or not they all are, because the head scientist,
he's obviously just insane.
Is this older guy, and everybody calls him Frankenstein, and he's like always covered in blood. Yeah. And he's the one that's like experimenting and dissecting the zombies. And again, you have some great effect shots in his lab with like, these puppeted heads, or like there's a really great shot. It's an effect so great they do it twice, where there's like a zombie laying on an operating table with an open stomach, and then they get up and turn over, and all of their internal organs fall out.
It's so good.
It's so gross and disgusting. And he, he's not even trying to like cure the virus or whatever, or figure it out. He's trying to domesticate zombies. Yeah. And his star pupil is the zombie Bub.
We love him.
We love Bub here, folks. Bub did nothing wrong.
I just think it's so interesting. Like, it shows how insane he is, that he's probably the person in the movie who the most thinks that we can like coexist with zombies, and he seems to have like genuine care for trying to like work with Bub and stuff, but at the same time he's also just like blatantly torturing them, like keeping just like the spinal cord alive to see if it can feel pain. Like he's just totally lost it,
and he like exterminates them with no thought or whatever.
Right. And then like feeds the dead people to the zombies as well, like the people he's cohabitating with. He's just crazy.
Right, because his theory, right, is like you have to socialize them with rewards, and there are these great little breakdown moments where he's like, because if there's no reward, then there's no point for socialization, like, and there's a number of times where like there's early on in the movie, there's a scene where there's like two zombies chained to a wall, and they're like freaking out, and he like leaves the room, and he says like, that wasn't very nice, and you can just sit here like bad little boys and girls and think about what you've done. And he turns the light off, and then the zombies are like left in the dark, and they're like, whoa, and they start groaning sadly. It's really fucking weird.
It's really funny. And I mean, the comment that you made, I think it's in this scene where the main character Sarah is talking to him, and he's just like calmly drilling into a zombie's head while it like screams, and you were like, this is humanity's last hope right here.
Yes,
like,
right. Well, I mean, and I think that's Romero's point, right? It's like, there's so much invested in this project, and it's not going to pan out. And the main like antagonist of the film, Captain Rhodes, who's played by Joe Pilato, who I guess some people think his performance is over the top, but I think it's like very appropriately over the top.
Oh my god, it's so good.
There are many sequences of him just screaming, and there's this fantastic like 20-minute scene at the beginning of the film where it's all takes place as all the characters are assembled in this like canteen meeting hall, and it's 20-minute scene. There's never a zombie, but it's, I think, one of the most fantastic horror scenes I've ever seen, with all just the blocking going on, but also the progression of the tension, where you realize like, we see through the eyes of our protagonist, who's Sarah, like, everybody here is insane. And this is, like, there's no, like, this is just deep paranoia. The entire function and whatever thing we were holding out for is broken down and gone.
Right.
And what we're left with is basically this, like, petty little military tyrant and this insane mad scientist. And those are our hopes. And there's a great scene, too, with Pilato, where, like, after, I think it must be after when he first sees what like Frankenstein's doing, which is like trying to socialize the zombies. And it like hard cuts from them in the lab to them in the meeting room, and Joe Pilato just like slams his gun on the table, and he's like, "What the fuck is wrong with you people? They're dead!" and it's really funny because again, the military here are not played as good guys. They're played explicitly, again, like the cops in Dawn of the Dead. They're played as racist, reactionary, misogynist. Sarah is the only woman in the cave, and they like casually joke about like sexually assaulting her and stuff.
They joke about her like having sex with the insane scientist, I think, as well. Like they say a bunch of shit.
It's her
boyfriend. Yeah.
She's sort of dating one of the soldiers at the beginning of the film. And they're like obviously sort of jealous or whatever. But yeah, they make all these lewd comments, so they're not like, they're very clearly not good guys. But in that one particular moment when Captain Rhodes slams his gun down, he's like, they're dead. It's like, he's right.
It's it's like the general, like the reactionary general in Mars Attacks, where when he's like,
right, he's like, we have to nuke him, but we have to nuke him now.
You know that he's like, right. Like,
and he's 100% right. Yeah.
Right.
Which again is not, I don't think is Romero siding with that politics. I think that he's playing and pulling those things apart. And oh, sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that, and also, like, while this one isn't so focused on, like, the consumerism stuff, there was a really good line in that scene that you were talking about where they're all gathered around talking and the tensions are heightening, where the radio operator says that they've, like, lost contact with everybody, power is off in the mainland, and he, like, concludes it saying, and all the shopping malls are closed. Like, that's how bad this is right now.
Right. Sure. Which is also obviously a little joke about Dawn.
Right.
But it is, it's like, I mean, everything is gone. And to that point too, the character, so like the main characters end up becoming Sarah, then Bill the operator, and then John, who's also called Flyboy in this, so you might as well call him Flyboy.
So cool. Again,
black protagonist, and he's Caribbean. It's never specified from where. But he's got like a West Indian accent. And he has this scene where like him and the operator, they're like civilians, but they're not scientists. Mm-hmm. And so they live like away from everybody else in the cave, and there's like a little trailer they've set up. And they just like to get high and drunk and shit and hang out.
Me too.
And they're like, yeah, and they're not interested. There's a great line at the very beginning when they're going down into the bunker, and John says to Sarah, he says something like we should go take the helicopter, just go find an island somewhere and get good and tanked. And she says, you could do that with all this going on. And he goes, shit, man, I could do this even if all this wasn't going on. But like, I mean, that character is very clearly like the one that Romero is speaking through, like the one that he's like putting his philosophy in, and the memorable like kind of monologues that John has is when Sarah goes to their little like outcrop relaxing area. Yeah, she kind of challenges them on like not helping out. Mm-hmm. And he has this great monologue about like who gives a shit, like what are you guys even doing here,
right? Yeah.
And this is sort of like a fun production design thing, because the mine that they're shooting in, they use those mines as storage, like ex-mine shafts. It's something about the humidity and the controlled temperature. So that is a place where they have like they keep like all the stuff you see in the movie, like trailers and boats and tons of records and film negatives.
That stuff that was like already there being stored?
Yes.
That's so interesting.
So he has this monologue where he's talking about like, what you have down here is you have all the records of all the Fortune 500 companies. You have, the Defense Department budget. You have all of this stuff. And then he's like holding a binder of it. And he tosses it on the table. He's like, who the fuck is going to read any of this? We're not going to read any of this. This is all just like one great big tombstone.
Yeah.
And all you guys are doing is also trying to like keep little records down. And it's, I think there's a way to look at it where you could say that's sort of a nihilistic approach, but I think it's a very like sort of rational and reasonable approach to be like,
for sure,
there's no point in holding on to the old world here.
Yes.
And to try to pretend that like the institutions of power are even worth saving.
Right, and there's also a lot about like the conflict between the insane scientists and the military guys, right? Because the military guys want to then like kill the scientist specimens, and he has a line where he says like, what are you going to do? Like, where are you going to go? You can destroy my specimens, but there's millions more outside. You're lost unless you can make them behave. Like, he thinks that he can control them somehow. Military guys think that they can kill them all, which they realistically can't. Like, right. The logical thing
can't do either.
Right, the logical thing is just to be like, who gives a fuck? Like, everything is gone. Like, let this go. Right,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic, it's my favorite like end of the world kind of movie. Because it all takes place in the sort of the decaying mind of the old world. And it's like literally the characters are like these decaying minds of the old world, still holding on to it. And so, of course, like every other movie, the climax is the zombies finally get in. Right. And it's largely because of the tensions between the two groups. Like, their fighting causes the situation in which all the zombies can get in. And Bub gets set free. And one of the other things, too, that we see is like Frankenstein realizes like Bub was a soldier, which is also, again, kind of Romero playing at like the stupidity of like military guys. Yeah. And like Bub like salutes Captain Rhodes. Yeah. And he takes the gun, and he like it moves it a little bit further than Dawn with the like zombies have some instinctual memory. Right. Like, we should talk a little bit more about Bub, maybe. Like, he's trying to get him. Let's talk Bub. Let's talk Bub. I mean, Dr. Logan is trying to like, I don't know. He's trying to jog his memory, right? That's his theory that it was kind of like mentioned before in the previous film, that idea of like stuff from their living life is still in their heads. We just need to bring it back out. At one point, he's trying to get Bub to say hello, Aunt Alicia, about his aunt. Yeah. Say hello, Aunt Alicia. It's so good because you can see how delusional he is. Yeah. They're both really good performances. They played off each other really well, and it was also interesting to see them talking about it then in the documentary as well about
how he performed that character of Bob. It's really good. I mean, I think he does a really good job of humanizing it, but then like you said, it's really funny that when he has the gun and he does like the salute and he avenges Dr. Logan.
Yeah, he gets out. So Captain Rhodes kills Logan, who's Frankenstein, and so then Bub gets out, and then he finds Frankenstein, who's dead, and he's like, oh, like almost like, oh, daddy, like, hello. Yeah. And then he realizes Frankenstein is dead, and then he lets out like a no moan, and then he goes on the warpath to find Captain Rhodes and kill him. And so at the very end, at the climax, when all the zombies are in, right, like, Rhodes is like running around the bunker and he's like closing doors behind him to keep the horde, and he turns around a corner and Bub is there with the gun and shoots him. Yeah, it's like you can imagine in his mind, he's like, "What the fuck?"
And then they're eating him, and that's like the famous scene of him screaming, "Choke on him! Choke on him! Choke on him!"
Yeah, he gets pulled apart.
That's what I was thinking of when you asked me what's your favorite zombie kill. Like after I said like I don't remember any from this, I immediately thought of this, and then also the guy doing the sign of the cross with his gun before blowing his head off.
Oh yeah, Steel, which is
really
another great. Like all of these characters are super memorable.
Yeah,
especially for like a weird genre movie where most of them just have like horrific deaths, but like you can like very quickly access it in a way I would argue more so than a lot of like modern, not even zombie movies, but just like action or horror movies. I know all of these characters, and part of it is that they're playing caricatures a little bit, but it works for the context of the film. It's just so deeply memorable, and it's weird because even in the documentary they talk about this being sort of more dour, and I do think it's more, I guess, like pessimistic or dark than Dawn of the Dead. Like Dawn of the Dead is a little bit more whimsical.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tackling, like Dawn of the Dead was tackling something a little bit lighter, right? I think in the documentary, I mean, not too much lighter, but in Document of the Dead, he says that it's about the false security of consumer society. And like you were saying, like this one is more about like the breakdown of all authority. Like there is nobody to help here. Science can't help. The military can't help. There is no controlling this.
Right. And it's not worth saving, too.
Right.
I think that's the other big thing, is that's the moral space that you end up at the end of the film. It's like, none of this is actually worth saving.
Right.
Which possibly true. Certainly in that world.
Yeah, once it's been taken over by zombies, I mean, I would not be, I don't even want to say what I would do.
But, yeah, I mean, again, just like absolutely fantastic. And I think, what I was going to say was, it's still like there are lots of fun moments in it.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if it's exactly like campy or whatever. But there are definitely like really great, gory effects moments that have a playful nature to them. There's like at one point they like kill a zombie by shoving a shovel in his mouth.
Oh yeah.
And then they flip the top of the skull away.
Yeah, it goes
and then there's a wide shot of the characters running away, and in the foreground is like the zombie's upside down half skull with its eyes still moving, like it's still animated. A lot of like great puppetry, fantastic effects. I'm really, again, just so surprised that people didn't like it, and it might be too that like
why.
It might be too that the themes were too much for what was essentially probably going to be like a drive-in like X-rated movie.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
Which again, too, this one is definitely one of the ones where you watch and you're like, oh, I can get, because it is so gory. Like you're like, oh, I can understand why. Like this might get like a limited release or whatever at the time,
sure.
But it's still relatively tame compared to a lot of the stuff nowadays.
I mean, it's tamer than the stuff that's just like on Sci-Fi or AMC or whatever, for sure.
Yeah. Also, this is a little fun fact. Greg Nicotero is in the movie. He plays one of the soldiers, and he was also on Savini's effects team. And then Nicotero went on to do a couple of the later Romero ones, but then also like The Walking Dead and a bunch of other stuff as like the head effects supervisor. Yeah. Another thing they mentioned in the documentary about this was that like people really didn't like the score. And I loved the score so much that we opened this episode with it.
Right.
It has like a kind of calypso, like Caribbean vibe at points.
Yeah.
And I think that's cool.
I thought it was
know.
really fun. I think it's a really fun soundtrack. I think another problem people had was the overacting too, right? Which
I don't know. Think it's overacting.
It's satire.
I'm gonna die on this hill. Yes, it's satire without needing to be explicit comedy. Right. It's like very clear. Like Joe Pilato is insane because the military is insane.
Right.
Like, that's the point. And also, I have like a little soft spot in my heart because when I was in film school, one of the ideas we always talked about but never ended up doing, unfortunately, was redoing that big canteen scene with me in the role of Joe Pilato.
Oh, I didn't realize Joe Pilato had passed away in 2019.
Yeah, he died recently. Unfortunately, a bunch of these guys passed away recently. I mean, Romero, as we'll get to, also died not too long ago, 2017. But yeah, Pilato wasn't in a lot of other things. He did have he has a brief scene in Dawn of the Dead. He's one of the other cops at the boathouse thing at the beginning.
He seems like such a very fun guy from the documentary, which I definitely recommend. It's very fun.
He seems like a me kind of guy. He seems like silk shirt, hot tub guy. What? Like that's definitely the vibe from Joe Pilato. And he talks like this kind of a little bit today. And he's like, not today, but in the documentary, which came out like 2013 with like the re-release or whatever, he's like smoking the whole time. And he hasn't aged well, but he's aged beautifully, for a guy like that.
You just want to be him.
I absolutely want to be him.
One thing about the documentary that really struck me was how unsafe the set of this movie was.
Oh, yeah. Maybe briefly we could talk about that.
Well, because No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, on the other side of all of these movies having been done, they always talk about it like this was like a family of like the Romero Pittsburgh people, like they all worked on the same movies together, and as somebody who's worked in independent film, you get that sense of like camaraderie that you have and that sense of attachment you have especially when like you're working on something really interesting and cool and fun, and everybody's happy to do it. But in the documentary, they bring up a lot of these stories as these like fun remembrance stories, and like the blanket one is because they were shooting in the mine. A lot of times they would like stay overnight in the mine, and somebody at one point in the documentary was like, we started to like get like this black suit covered all over our lungs, and every morning we'd wake up coughing with it, and it was just, oh man, all this stuff that's all around us, it's now inside us.
It was so fun. We all had like fevers, and there was some kind of thing happening there. There were a lot of stories of people getting hurt. I think there was one guy thought he had killed somebody else by accident. What was it that he had done?
One of the effects guys grabbed like a fire extinguisher, but it was a chemical fire extinguisher, because all the effects guys were like pranksters, and they were all, Savini was in charge of them, but the rest of them were probably in their
young
early
guys.
20s.
Yeah, I mean, they still looked relatively young in the documentary compared to the actors, so they must have been pretty young.
And so they were always like playing pranks on each other with the different effects and things they had. And one of the guys grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed Tom Savini in the face, but it was like a chemical thing.
Yeah, so he had to go to the hospital.
And not a foam one. So he was worried he blinded him. And they joked about that.
The alligator, the alligator that we love in the beginning of the movie, he was severely injured. That really bummed me out, man.
They told a story where they got these like alligator wranglers or whatever. And they brought the alligator in on like a truck, and when they were taking the alligator off, they like dropped the gator, and so he hurt himself. And then the two like wranglers were dressed up as zombies, and they're the two guys behind the gator in the shot, so that they could like supervise it. And I guess the gator took revenge against one of them and like smacked him with his tail and sent him flying. And everybody was kind of like laughing about. I mean, again, that's one of those things. Yeah, sure, 30 years later or whatever. In hindsight, it's funny, but that's like you injured an animal, and a very dangerous one at that, and then you set it loose on the set.
That's movies, baby. That's movie magic.
Movie magic. The other thing too, for being such a dour movie, or called such a dour movie, I don't buy that I guess it's dark, but I think part of the reason why I'm somewhat resistant to that is the ending is one of the more optimistic ones.
Oh yeah.
Because at the end, our three mains get out. And they take the helicopter. Everybody else gets horribly murdered, but they get out, and the last shot is them on like some Caribbean island or whatever, just hanging out.
Right. And I think the very last thing we see the main character doing is she's crossing off the days on the calendar that just went by, because the film starts on the Halloween calendar. So it's really that message of like
today.
Moving
today.
That's when we're recording, baby. So it's really that message of like, it's still important for her to be like keeping track of these days and to keep moving forward. So it's not like that nihilistic message of like, it's not worth
things.
Right.
Some things are kept. Yeah.
It's not that it's not worth trying. It's that we have to try for something different instead of trying to hold on to what was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, I love it. I noticed we've now talked about this probably for 30 minutes or whatever. But
oh my gosh, we're over an hour in.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that's fine because
there's not going to be a lot to say.
There's not as much to say. But I think, Day of the Dead to me is truly beloved, and if you haven't watched it for whatever reason, big recommend.
Yeah.
Big recommend on this Halloween. Great spooky movie.
I wanted to mention as well, I think it's Romero. I didn't write down who said this, but I believe it was Romero that said in the documentary that like the way that none of them can get along or figure anything out is a lot like Congress.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's okay. So here, now that we're in the transitional period, I think it's important to bring up. So Day of the Dead was like a failure commercially.
Such a bummer.
And a bunch of the other movies Romero had done in between were not super successful. They were movies that kind of like broke even, had a little bit of success. He then did like a TV show for a while. He did like a couple of other movies, but again, they were all like kind of middling success. He never had like, he never reached like some amazing pinnacle of success, at least financially, I don't think. But, like he sort of had his spot as like this, he's known as like the father of the zombie movie, this kind of respected master of horror. And even one way or another, I think it's fair to say he went a little bit dormant in those latter years. And then, like we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the zombie thing came back. Also partially because of like Resident Evil, the game series, and then later the film series. Yeah. I think Romero was even asked to like shoot a commercial for them or something.
Oh, that's interesting. Because he had done commercials when he started his career, right?
Right, yeah. So I think he did a commercial for Resident Evil, one of the games. And,
interesting.
He did like a bunch of cameo kind of stuff. But, by the time of the 2000s, like, there was, he had this big impact, and there was all this, again, either his cameos or, like, there were tons of stuff then called, like, Romero, different things, like in horror movies and stuff. There are all these, like, nods to him and what have you. And then I guess in the early 2000s, the zombie craze comes back, a sort of modern,
it's back from the dead, baby.
Of it. Oh, hey.
Sorry.
Dawn of the zombie, am I right, folks? And I guess somehow because of that, he was like, I'm kind of having my moment again. I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna make more zombie movies.
Oh man. I wish he hadn't.
So let's briefly talk about these now. So Land of the Dead, 2005. So there's a 20-year gap between this and Day of the Dead.
Yes. Yeah.
What can be said about Land of the Dead? It was my first Romero zombie movie I saw, because again I saw it in theaters when I was 15. And I was like, oh.
Yeah.
I was like, okay.
I mean, I think that it is an interesting idea, and I like the themes that it plays with, but it just does not do it well, Yeah.
I mean, I think Land of the Dead is like fine. Land of the Dead is okay. I think part of the reason why we were a little less generous of it in this watch through is that we just watched the other three movies. And then we put on Land of the Dead, and it was like, oh.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so premise of Land of the Dead, and this
was set in Pittsburgh, right?
Yes, it is set in Pittsburgh. Romero took some things that he had cut out of the script for Day of the Dead, and kind of expanded on them in Land of the Dead. So Land of the Dead, keeping with the original 3 movies, is like a little bit further on, and now it's been like several years into the zombie apocalypse. And there are these little cordoned off bits of survivors in large cities, and the one that we see is Pittsburgh. And basically, these cities survive by scavenging the outlying areas for, in the ruins of supermarkets and whatever, finding essential supplies.
Such as alcohol.
And cigars. And the city itself is very starkly divided between the haves and the have-nots,
right.
And all the rich people live in this fancy luxury tower that's run by Fiddler's Green. That's run by this guy Kaufman, who's played by Dennis Hopper.
You know what I didn't realize until I was reading about this is that Fiddler's Green is like from maritime folklore. It's like an afterlife where you get to like live it up.
Oh,
so
okay.
Just a little reference.
That makes sense.
Reference
nice little
there.
fun, like the tower unto heaven kind of idea. And everybody else in the city lives in this like sprawling slum outside of it.
Awful.
And there's a very, again, it's a very stark division. And I think this is one of the reasons why I even thought about talking about it in the context of this show, is I was like, oh yeah, Land of the Dead is like the one that has like pretty intense class politics.
Yeah.
And, rewatching it, you come to the end of it and you're like, wow, that had pretty intense class politics. And that's it.
It's everything is very on the nose. Like,
yes. It's not handled that interestingly. But, it's there. And so the premise of the film itself is like, this guy who runs everything, Dennis Hopper, and then there's like the scavengers, and there's 2 main scavengers. There's Riley Denbo, who's played by
Star Wars ass name.
Generic white guy protagonist.
Simon Baker.
And then there's Cholo Demora, who's played by John Leguizamo. And John Leguizamo is like the second in command of the scavengers, and he's like, I want to live in the big fancy tower.
Right.
And if I keep doing enough side gigs for the big man, I'm gonna get to live in the big fancy tower. And he goes to the big man in the big fancy tower, and he gives him like alcohol and cigars, and he's like, all right, I've got like the $1 million or whatever, I can buy a condo in this tower now. And of course the guy's like, you're not allowed to live in here,
right?
And so then John Leguizamo goes like AWOL and holds the whole city ransom. They've got this like giant zombie fighting truck thing, which is sort of like, why George? Why George Romero? Like, that's now, because now it's starting to seep in, and I think this is the thing that we were talking about while watching it. It's like Land of the Dead really does just feel like every other modern zombie movie.
Yes, I think that this is the one where I was just like, oh, this is just like a contemporary zombie movie now with like all the elements that we expect, the same kind of like general look. Did I say inspect instead of expect? Well, leave it in. Yeah, I don't know. I guess like since we had watched it, like you said, so back to back over like a couple of days, I wanted to keep seeing him do something new. And this is where he kind of starts to pull back from that. Even though, like you said, like the themes are very obvious and they are interesting themes, and there are a couple of fun, like revenge on the rich kind of moments.
Right, yeah. I mean, again, spoiler alert. There is, at the climax of the movie, the zombies finally do get into the tower.
Right.
And when they do, that's the best stuff in the movie. And it
So
lasts for
good.
about 5 minutes. And all the zombies go through all these like rich people living, again, in their literal high rise, in these like fancy restaurants and luxury goods shops. The zombies come in and just like fucking massacre them.
Yeah.
And so that, again, in my head, I was like, oh, eat the rich. Like, but again, that's, it takes an hour and a half to get there.
Yeah.
And it's pretty bland before then. It attempts to do some other like post-apocalyptic things. Like at the beginning of the movie, there's like this whole sequence that takes place in like a zombie fighting ring.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, George Romero never got to that point in the apocalypse in his earlier movies. And then once you do get there, there's not really that much to do with it.
Yeah.
Maybe it could have been more interesting. I don't know. The class stuff gets kind of muted because there's there's like an Irish guy named Mulligan who's like he's like soapboxing in the slums.
Yeah,
and he's like, listen to me, people. We should take down the rich people from their tower, and we should rise up. And he gets like arrested.
Yeah. I was thinking there was like he did do something new here. It's not fair to say that he didn't do something new, because he also does take this idea of like zombies having some kind of intelligence and just needing to like be reminded of things a step further. There's the Big Daddy zombie. That's his name. Yes. Big Daddy zombie.
Let's talk about Big Daddy. And interestingly too, again, and I think this is certainly a conscious choice, because like race is present in all of Romero's movies, or at least all the Dead movies. And it's usually, I would say in the first three movies, it's handled in a really interesting way. And where it's like, it's present, and there are like bigoted characters who are clearly like the ones that you're supposed to be not sympathetic towards, and usually have some kind of comeuppance and stuff. And, you know, there's always like a black protagonists, and other people of color in like the leading roles, versus like, a lot of like bigoted, like awful reactionary white people. And in Land of the Dead, the main zombie named Big Daddy is like the black protagonist.
Yeah.
And he's a gas attendant. And early on in their invasive scavenging, they like activate the little ring-a-ding-ding bell at his gas station. And they start like going through the town and like killing zombies, and Big Daddy's like, no, he's not talking, but you get through his expressions, he's really unhappy that like humans are killing zombies.
Yeah.
So he like steals a gun early on from one of the scavengers, and then he like teaches the other zombies to like follow him, and so he leads like an uprising zombie army to go like take down the rich people in their fancy tower. So there is a further development of the bub idea, the living dead having memories, or even like their own motivations.
Was this the one, because this is in the next movies I know is where I really started to kind of zone out. Was this the one where they call the fireworks sky flowers?
Yeah.
There's we don't know. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that part of the movie?
I don't know if I want to talk. I don't know. There's a lot of stuff in here.
Let's just put it this way. There's a character named Charlie who is, it's never explicitly stated, but it's heavily implied that Charlie has like a mental disability.
Yeah.
And Charlie is still a protagonist, and he's a cool guy, and he survives the movie, but it's like it's a
weird performance.
It's a weird choice to put in the movie. But it feels like there are ways that could have been handled a little bit better or more interesting. But what was that? Oh, there was the big payoff for Big Daddy is after he like kills Kaufman at the very end of the movie. He like leads they come in, they kill the rich people, and what's interesting is too, he like when the zombies first breach the gates outside the city, they like kill all the guards or whatever, and the zombies start eating the guards, and Big Daddy's like, no. Like, it's not time to eat.
Right.
You have to keep moving.
Right.
So he's especially smart zombie. But
I guess that Dr. Logan was right, and the zombies can be taught.
Sure. By other zombies.
That
was the hang up, yeah. But at the very end of the movie, after they've destroyed the rich people tower, like, Denbo, the like main protagonist of the film, and his little group of people, they're gonna like get out too. Like, they don't want to live in the city anymore. They don't want to like keep trying to rebuild humanity. They want to go find a place with like nobody. Right. So they're like about to drive out, and then on an overpass, Big Daddy is like leading his zombies out of the city, and like our protagonist Denbo and Big Daddy, they like share a look. And to hit it over the head even more, somebody's like, "Oh, should we kill all the zombies with our giant rockets?" And he's like, "No, they're just trying to find a place to live like us." Which again, it's very stupid, but I think the credit that's given here is again in the period of the zombie revival film where like the politics had gotten switched around and zombies were always coded as the others and monsters. This is Romero's way to try to be like,
sure,
in a clunky and ham-fisted way to be like, hey, they're people too, man.
Sure.
They are still zombies. That's my issue with
well,
it.
but there's hope, I think, is kind of like the message of it. Like a different world is possible versus us just all like killing each other. And
sure.
Maybe I'm being too generous.
It's fine. It's a fun movie to watch because all the rich people get eaten. But yeah, Land of the Dead. A
lot of weird 2000 stuff.
A lot of weird 2000 stuff. It's fine.
It's
fun. Again, the eating the rich people is the fun part of the movie. So if you can stomach a kind of like boring zombie film for the rest of it, there are some fun kills. I think it's also like the makeup gets a little bit more generic.
Yeah, and I wonder if it feels generic though, just because like, you know, the look of zombies now was so heavily inspired by Romero's work. Like maybe it's unfair for us to feel that way, but it does again just feel like this is just like a regular zombie movie from the 2000s.
Yeah,
like, that's
I think it's also, I think Nicotero was the lead like makeups guy on this one.
Okay.
And you know, and then he went and did The Walking Dead,
right.
and there is like a similar look there. There's also like more CG
yes
in this one. I mean, obviously in the earlier ones it was all practicals. And then, you know, whatever. That's not the most important point always to make, but you can kind of feel a little bit in this movie. The one point though that I think was worth it, and you could tell Romero had a little giggle at this idea. Mm-hmm. At one point, a headless priest zombie walks up to one of our characters, and then he like flips his head, so he's like a decapitated priest, where like half of it, you know, like a part of his like neck flap skin on the back is still like tethered to his head, so he's able to like flip his head over, to bite one of our characters, and that's a fun little moment.
That is very fun.
Obviously, they did that with CG. But it was fun.
Yeah, it was very fun.
So that's it. Those are all the zombie movies
There's no more.
George Romero ever did. No.
Turn this off. No, I'm just kidding.
Very unfortunately, let's get into the last two here, and we could probably talk about them together.
Yeah.
They feel very similar.
I mean, at one point, I guess it was also late, but at one point after you started, like the very last one, I wasn't even sure we had like transitioned between movies.
Yes.
I was like, what's going on? Because so Diary of the Dead is the next one, and that one's like
2007.
2007. That one is like a found footage type of deal with it's I had never seen this before, and I was really blown away by like the amount of narration.
I first saw this when I was in college, and I was in film school, and at that point I'd seen most of the other Romero films, and I was a really big fan. And somebody told me the premise of Diary of the Dead, which was it's about a group of college students who are shooting a horror movie, and then the zombie apocalypse happens, and then they keep shooting it, and it's like a documentary. It's like a found footage documentary.
And it's not a bad premise.
And I thought, wow, that sounds really neat. That feels like a movie that we would make.
Right.
And then I started watching it, and I was like, oh, this really is a movie we would make. It's so bad. It really sucks. I don't know what about it. There's so many, like, again, interesting premise, but like all the dialogue sucks. All the performances suck.
The dialogue is so crazy. Like, just like the way that the characters talk to each other, and like it's just like such everything again. Even more so than like the previous one was like extremely, extremely on the nose. Like anything that's supposed to be like meta commentary or whatever, it just like hits you over the head, and then after it's hit you over the head, they'll say another line about it.
Okay, all right. So let's get in. There's the two things here, right?
Yeah.
The first one is that instead of continuing with the kind of rough chronology of the other films, it resets it. So now it's like this is taking place the night that, you know, the dead are becoming reanimated, right? So the first problem is that concept has been done now a million times.
Right.
Romero himself started his career by doing that concept. We've seen the zombie outbreak thing in a million other little iterations.
Right.
So if you're going to do, like, we're going to start with the zombie outbreak again, it has to be interesting, which it isn't.
Right.
The second point is that the thing that is different, the found footage element, is like you were saying, Cari, like the social commentary stuff, instead of like it moves from the film to film where it's like characters become kind of more of caricatures as the films go on in order to represent, like, I'm the stand-in for the military, I'm the stand-in for the rich people. I'm the stand-in for scientists, whatever.
Right.
And the dialogue gets a little bit hokier each time. By the time you're in Diary of the Dead, the narration just says what the theme of the movie is, often like multiple times within 2 or 3 sentences. And okay, yeah, go
I was just gonna say, like, just from like the very beginning, it's like showing the news footage or whatever, and right at the gate there's like the narrator talking, saying like how chaotic it was, like this is like footage from a camera crew or whatever, a news crew that like never aired. There was no way to get information. We downloaded a lot of what we found off the net.
Yes,
it's like all this like weird dated language.
The characters are constantly talking about uploading and downloading from the net.
The web.
And this came out in 2007.
Yeah.
So it's not like the 90s or something. And you know, as this group of film students like travel across Pennsylvania in like a Winnebago or whatever, they keep stopping, and part of the idea is the protagonist is desperate to re-upload his thing to the net. And the theme of the movie, the social commentary theme, is like, now everybody's got cameras. Like that's it. Like it's all about like because the idea is like the main guy, the film student, is like filming everything, and like 5 times in the movie, everybody else is like, why don't you put down the camera? You're obsessed with filming. And he's like, I have to document this so I can upload it to the net.
And to also clarify what's happening at the beginning, which is I think what gives us like the seed of a good idea, is like they're filming a horror movie before the zombie outbreak happens, and then he transitions from making that film project into documenting, you know, what's happening with the zombies, which is not like a bad idea in and of itself. Like I think I told you while we were watching it made me think of what they did with the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, that they had that whole movie where it was like meta, all the actors were being killed.
Oh yeah, New Nightmare. Yeah, that would be a great idea.
Amazing.
Yeah, like you could do like a meta commentary like on the set of a horror movie, zombies attack.
Right, and they could have taken that direction with it. That was almost what like the setup implied, but then it was just like so on the nose, like the dialogue between the characters, the way that like the woman playing like the damsel in distress in the horror project they're filming kind of talks about women in movies. It's so on the nose. Like it's not even dialogue, it's just him like writing ideas and having the actors say it.
Yeah. This is most like in Day of the Dead, there's the character Flyboy, the second Flyboy, who's kind of like Romero's mouthpiece. So he gives that little speech. Diary of the Dead is like everybody's Romero's mouthpiece. Everybody is just like explicitly stating. It's like a first draft. It's a first draft where you're like, okay, what happens in this scene? We need to communicate that this guy's obsessed with holding a camera. How are we going to do that? We'll have somebody say, you're obsessed with holding a camera. And he'll go, yes, I am obsessed with holding a camera. It's just, it sucks.
I guess, like, you know, with all the ones that we've covered so far up to this one, it was very clear to me what the message was. And even if, like, in the last one, it was, like, a little bit on the nose, it was still, you know, it was still, like, good politics or whatever. I guess, like, the message of this one is just, like, millennials be on phone.
Yes, right. There's no political anything to this. You can kind of credit it with, like, as opposed to just making nothing, like, you know, like he tried to do it, but it definitely reads as like old man who's not in tune with new developments, trying to say something about those new developments, and all he can really say is, wow, the younger generation, they're obsessed with their cameras and stuff.
Right. I guess there is a little bit of another message of like the importance of documenting stuff, right? Because then at the end, the narrator does see like a recording of people like using zombies as like targets, right?
Yeah, but what is that?
And she wonders if like she's like, oh, I guess humanity might just be like not worth saving after all or whatever. So it's like, which
it's
I
just
guess
too clunky. It's too clunky. It's just too. It's the there's not enough of a premise. Like, there's not enough of a thought there to base the film around, and there's nothing else going on in the film. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because you can say, like, if you took out all of the interesting, like, plot and character stuff of Day of the Dead, and you just had it be characters say, like, institutions aren't worth trusting, it would suck. But the reason why, you know, it's not a particularly developed idea, but it's done in an interesting and kind of masterful way, where it's it gives you a light taste of like thinking through some kind of broader philosophical conundrums while entertaining you. You're not entertained by Survival of the Dead.
Diary of the Dead.
Diary of the Dead. I mean, you're not entertained by either of them.
Survival of the Dead is way worse.
It somehow is worse.
It's way worse.
But yeah, I mean, there's not like I can't remember a single character's name. There's no point in even like naming any of them or describing any of the plot. There's one reason to watch Diary of the Dead, and it's if you're like me and you're a completionist and you want to say I've watched all of Romero's zombie movies. It's really I feel bad too because we were sort of talking about it because it's like it was only a few years after Land of the Dead, which I think was like his only like big studio picture because he had some money behind that. Diary of the Dead is like a lot less. There's a lot less budget. It's just like rougher. It really feels like college students made it.
It really does.
Like if college students had made it, I would have been like kind of impressed.
I think I mean if obviously,
but you know at that point it's like these are your like this is like your capstone moment, right? This is your moment to like to go out with a bang.
It's a bummer.
And we were talking about it, and I really don't think sometimes you look at like an aging artist and they put out a lot of like shit towards the back end of their career, and you look at that and you're like, oh, they needed money, right? Like
but he had money.
They were broke. I don't think he needed money. I think he wanted to be in this conversation about like new media. And I was reading about it. They did some kind of like MySpace promotional thing when this came out where like people could upload their own little amateur zombie things to MySpace and then they would be put on the DVD. And this came out in 2007, which means like it's already dated in like contemporaneously it was dated with language about like the net and hackers and stuff. I mean, just in terms of like being on the cusp of like Web 2.0 shit.
Right. It like missed that moment where that really would have like been cool, which was probably just a few years before that. Because like thinking about it, I would have been, if this came out, 2007, I would have been like 21. And when I was a teenager, it was really cool when like Donnie Darko had like a really cool companion site for the movie, which was like several years, but like 6 years before that or something.
It comes across uninteresting. There's a few fun little moments in it. There's like one performance. There's like an insane rich kid in it. Yeah. In the last third of the movie, and that's kind of interesting. But besides that, it's just like not very good. And there's a moment where they're like traveling in this Winnebago, and they have like it just sucks, dude. I can't express how much it sucks. Anyway, they're like traveling in this Winnebago with all these like supplies that they got from these like AWOL National Guards guys. Right. And then this other group of AWOL National Guards guys come up and like rob them, and they steal all their supplies. And it takes all of 2 minutes, and you're like, wow, that's another bump in this mostly boring movie. But I guess for George Romero, he was like, those characters are really interesting. And so they are then the protagonists of Survival of the Dead, which came out 2 years later. Well, I was wondering
what happened to them. I was like, I need to know.
I mean, Survival of the Dead.
It's a movie.
Oh God, it really is a fucking movie. It's a Western. It's trying to be a Western. Yeah. And it takes place on an island off the coast of Delaware called Plum Island. And on Plum Island, there are two rival Irish families. It's like the Muldoons and the O'Flynns, and they have thick Irish accents. And
I think it's generous to say they all have Irish accents. They all have they all have
accents.
Yes.
They all have accents is probably more accurately. The two main ones, the two patriarchs, the two dueling patriarchs have thick Irish accents. And I was trying to suss out, like, did this want to take place in like the 1800s? Right. Is the idea that like this island is so isolated that they've like maintained their own? Because there are a few places like in New England, there's like a few island fishing communities with like 100 people in it who all sound like some weird old Irish Welsh thing or something.
There's definitely like unique accents in that area, but I actually like Googled this to see if anybody else had said anything about it. I didn't find anything super interesting, but there was one person who said something like, they're in this place, Plum Island, off the coast of Delaware, where apparently the Irish accents are thicker than in Glasgow. It's just like, it's so cartoonish. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
It's very cartoonish,
but not in a fun, like, campy way. To be clear,
there's a few moments
maybe
in
a
this
few
one
moments
where there's a few moments where across my hardened, cynical, tired face, an inkling of a smile crept up.
Yeah.
When especially the one that we're on the side with, who I guess is the O'Flynn. He just sounds like a pirate or something.
Yeah, there is a point. Yeah.
I'm gonna get me that Muldoon. And so
you just love Irish guys. You love old Irish guys.
I do. I love a good old Irish guy, and he's treacherous.
Yeah.
So thanks for that stereotype, George. But these National Guards guys get involved in this conflict between these two families, and oh boy, Z, they all die.
Oh boy.
A couple of them get away, and the very last shot in the climax of the movie, the two families end up killing each other.
Yeah.
And at the very last shot of the movie, we see the revived and reanimated corpses.
The only good shot in the whole film.
The two patriarchs, the O'Flynn and the Muldoon, and they walk towards each other, and it's like a super wide of a western with it's a daytime, but with like a huge moon on the horizon.
It's a great shot.
And they both raise their pistols up to continue this pointless Hatfield McCoy-esque familial struggle indefinitely, even into the afterlife. And that is the only interesting shot in the movie. And if you wanted to know what the theme of the movie was, it's just that shot. It's the idea is, look at this pointless tribalism between these two groups of people. It prevents them from coming together and dealing with their problems in the way that they need to. And it's an idea. Like, it's an idea in the movie, for sure, but it's just not interesting.
It's interesting because it seems kind of like opposed to the message of other movies, which was kind of like, there is no way out of this, really, where, like, everybody could work together because, like, the people in charge are deranged, like, that breakdown of authority. This is more like, if everybody would just come together,
sure,
we would be able to get through this.
And it does feel also to me a little bit like older. Like, it's a little bit like I'm a senior.
I'm in the twilight of my life.
And I'm kind of thinking, not necessarily simpler, but just like in a less developed and in a more generic way, like, why can't we all just get along?
It's less radical, right, compared to the other ones.
Yes. Because the factional dispute thing, like, that's present in stretching back to the very first movie.
Yeah.
The very first movie is all about, like, people not being able to come together. But the subtext of the very first movie is race.
Right.
The reason why, like, the white family is scared of the other guy is because he's black.
Right.
Like, that's what's preventing them from getting together. So it's not just, like, vague tribalism. There's some meaning to it. Or in Day of the Dead, you have scientists and military completely at odds with each other. But the point isn't that they should be working together. The point is,
they can't.
They're irrevocably splintered, and, like, if they did, like, what would be gained from them working together?
Right, not just that they can't, but that they shouldn't.
Right.
We shouldn't be engaging these people because they're so crazy. This kind of, like, takes away that nuance and is just, like, kind of, like, generic, like, almost centrist idea of, like, everybody just needs to get in the room and talk.
Right. If we could only talk through our problems.
Right.
I would really like to do a cut of some of those really awful dialogue scenes in Survival of the Dead where they're, like, arguing about their petty nonsense, and then it just cuts to Joe Pilato from Day of the Dead going, like, what the fuck is wrong with you people? They're dead!
There's also, again, that theme of, like, would you be able to, like, kill your own people or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the other only thing going on in that movie, right? It's like a lot of families having to kill each other and stuff.
Which I don't know any of their names. I don't care about them.
Yeah, don't care.
The very idea of it is uninteresting to me at this point. Of course you kill your family if they're going to eat you.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing is, and this is like, again, a look thing, maybe a budget thing. Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead feel like sci-fi original movies.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure both had very limited releases and then were like direct to video. The cast, like the script already for both movies is not great, but the cast, if it had like really great performers in it, might be able to salvage some of it. But like I looked up, because the main guy who's the like protagonist of Survival of the Dead, who has like a cameo in Diary of the Dead, also had a bit part in Land of the Dead as a different character, and he's just like generic military guy. And I was like, what else is this guy in? Saw. Then I looked up like one of the like Saw 5. Then like I looked up a bunch of the other cast members in Diary of the Dead and Survival of the Dead. They were all in different like Saw 3, Saw 4, Saw 5. And you're just like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
I do want to say also that it might be unfair to compare this to something you would see on Sci-Fi, because Sci-Fi actually had Z Nation, which is better than both of these movies.
I think Sci-Fi might have like a Day of the Dead TV show or something.
Oh, do they? Did you see Z Nation or no?
No, I didn't see Z Nation.
I liked Z Nation. Sound off in the comments about whether you liked Z Nation or not, and if I should make Shane watch it. I never finished it. I think I only watched the first or second season, so if it sucked after that, don't get mad at me.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Getting to the end of it, these back half of this franchise was definitely a slog. But the original 3 I think are great. They're all great in their own ways. And I really think Day of the Dead is the kind of, I don't know, the forgotten middle child or whatever. Yeah. It's like, it's such a fucking fantastic movie. It's stunning to me every time I watch it that it didn't do well when it came out. It's constantly like the one I'll crusade for. And it's sad, it's sad Romero, like, made these awful movies at the end of his life, but at the same time, like, he got to do them.
What he wanted to do. This is just what he wanted to do.
Really sadly, he was gonna do a couple more. He was gonna continue with those characters from Survival of the Dead, and it was like he announced the next one. It was gonna be like The Road of the Dead or something.
Yeah.
And then like 3 days later, he died.
It's sad.
In 2017, sure. But I mean, again, he did die beloved and everything.
I love him,
and I do too. And that's one thing that is fun too about watching these documentaries. When you watch like the ones that were contemporaneous, so like when he made Dawn of the Dead, he's in the 70s. He looks like Zizek.
He looks like a young Zizek.
And he's like smoking, and then he adopted a look of this like old horror grandpa.
I love that look. I wish I had an old horror grandpa.
And he's got these like he had these big Coke bottle glasses, and you can tell he was just living it up and having a good time, and he was very happy to. He continued to do cameo stuff. He was in like a Call of Duty game, one of those zombie things. I mean, it was like a bit role in one of the zombie things. And, there's been a million knockoffs and ripoffs of all the different ideas that he had come up with, both in a general sense of like all the zombie stuff can trace its origins to him, but there's been like 3 remakes of Day of the Dead that have nothing to do with the original Day of the Dead. I saw one that came out a couple of years ago. It's called Day of the Dead Bloodline. It was like from Bulgaria. And I went to the opening night of it in New York City with some friends from film school. And no one else was in the theater except the 3 of us. And I was like, this is its opening weekend. And we watched the movie, and I was like, oh, that's why. And we were speculating, and we were like, this feels like a money laundering film. Like, this doesn't feel like a real movie. It feels like... the really sad thing that I found in doing the research for this is, now that Romero is dead, they want to go back and make more movies in the franchise, of course. And I found this on Wikipedia. There's a prospective film coming out next year called Night of the Living Dead 2.
Oh.
And here's the little explanation. Decades after the zombie apocalypse, Night of the Living Dead 2 takes place on a remote island where a small group of survivors take shelter, only to face fresh terror when the flesh eaters find their way ashore. Laurie Cardeal, Terry Alexander, and Jarlath Conroy respectively reprise their roles as Dr. Sarah Bowman, John Flyboy, and William Bill McDermott from Day of the Dead.
They're like they are quite old now.
They are all elderly.
Yeah.
And it's called Night of the Living Dead 2, but it seems to be a sequel to Day of the Dead.
Oh.
Like, so what the fuck is going on? Maybe this is a franchise that doesn't need to be reanimated? Let the dead lie.
Yeah. Wait, it's Night of the Living Dead 2, but one of those actors is from Day of the Dead. And you're saying
they're all from Day of the Dead.
So they're doing Night of the Living Dead 2.
That's what I'm saying, but it seems like a sequel to Day of the Dead.
Okay.
Yeah. It's the 3 survivors from the end of Day of the Dead.
Okay.
Because
it cut
the last shot is they're on the island.
Okay, so they're just using the name from the other movie. I'm already so confused. This is like an MCU type move.
Who knows? Who knows? I'll leave it alone. At this point, again, I think the zombie thing, it's been so overdone, and if it is going to have any politics, they're probably reactionary ones. There's good zombie things occasionally that come out. I like
zombie media still. I mean, it's just The Walking Dead kind of took over it and such. Like, it got such a grip on that I don't know.
Yeah.
And it got
almost
so
a
bad.
Death grip.
How far did you get into The Walking Dead, by the way?
I think season 8.
Is that the season where they have the people who live in garbage and have developed their own dialect?
Yeah.
Pretty good stuff. Interesting stuff politically.
Just turned it off.
I think I've got one more season away. Or I think it might be that season where, spoiler for The Walking Dead, I think Rick disappears.
Yeah.
I think that's when I stopped watching. I was like, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
Anyways.
It's, Romero one time was asked when The Walking Dead, was coming out, he was asked, like, what do you think about the Walking Dead?
Yeah.
And he's like, I won't watch it. It's a soap opera.
He's not wrong.
It's not a zombie movie.
Yeah, he's not wrong. I mean,
and he's not wrong.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. That's our little walkthrough of the Dead films. Again, Day of the Dead, Halloween. Watch it.
Happy Halloween.
And happy Halloween. Have a spooky time. Hopefully nothing dead or ghoulish will invade your home.
Or will it?
Bum, bum, bum. Good night, folks.
Good night.